Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch scale figure of Kuiil from The Mandalorian. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. When we were first introduced to the very first season of The Mandalorian, we met some really cool characters, and of course they were new and unique. We didn't know where their fates were going to lie, and sadly one of my fan favorite characters, Kuiil, did not last till the second season, but nevertheless we do have some cool collectibles like this Vintage Collection figure here. Now I kept this one carded as sort of a bit of a tribute to a really cool character, but I recently got my hands on the fantastic Vintage Collection Blurrg that came with the Mandalorian figure, and of course Blurrgs and Kuiil go together so well and so often in that first season. I really want to get this figure out of the packaging so I can add it to my display alongside a Blurrg, and I also want to see if this Kuiil figure can actually ride a Blurrg as well. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to take it out, which I'm really excited to do now that I have a Blurrg to go alongside him. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll get the Kuiil figure out of the packaging. We'll go over the details, the accessories, and try seating him on the Blurrg figure. But first, let's take one last look at the backing card. The packaging for the Vintage Collection action figures takes a lot of inspiration from the original Kenner backing cards of the Star Wars figures from the 70s and 80s. We have the Star Wars logo here with a single chrome racetrack surrounding the Mandalorian series logo here in that fantastic red font there. And of course, another single chrome racetrack surrounding the character art here to the side. This does look a little bit more like a screen grab rather than a high-res promotional image, just the way that it's cropped here. And it is a little bit dark. I would think perhaps if they had some promotional high-res images, they would have chosen one with a little bit more light here to show the costume details. But nonetheless, I think it is a good image there of Kuiil. Of course, he's going to be a little bit short compared to the rest of the backing card. We can see some of that sort of blue sky in there behind it. And for Kuiil, we have this really kind of fun teal color here for the nameplate with white font. Just reads simply Kuiil. And of course, that same color used behind the figure here as well. The Kuiil action figure comes with a backpack, which I'm hoping is going to be pretty easy to put on the back, and one blaster accessory there as well. Moving on to the back of the backing card, this one is noted as being VC227, of course a little bit older now in terms of the lineup, and we can see that of course this being an older figure, we still have the older style of backing card here. Hasbro has since changed up the style of the printing on the back here. We still have the Star Wars logo with the twin chrome racetrack surrounding some preview images here of other action figures that were released around the same time, like Lobot, IG-11, Bib Fortuna, and Lando Calrissian. We've got the Vintage Collection logo here on the back, and the rest of the backing card is barcode, copyright warning, all of that kind of stuff. It does take up a lot of space, especially when we compare it to the vintage Kenner action figure backing cards, which were mostly images of other things you could buy. But I think with the modern translations and modern toy warning labels, we just have a lot more text here to contend with. But honestly, for most of us, it's the front of the backing card that is the most important aspect. This is what's going to be displayed on our shelves, and it is the most nostalgic part of it. So overall, not my favorite backing card just because of the slightly darker image here for Kuiil, but I do like the color they chose for behind the figure. It all ties in very nicely. But let's get this one open so we can check out the figure details. So now I have the Kuiil action figure and the two accessories out of the packaging, so we can go over all of the details. So this is a really cool figure. He's going to be quite different to a standard sort of human-sized figure because, of course, Kuiil is a shorter, an Ugnaught, and I'm hoping that we'll have some good articulation, though, of course, with slightly shorter limbs and torso. I think we might have a few limitations, especially in terms of just like how much we can bend at the joints because everything's just a little bit shorter. But let's go through it. One thing that I noticed straight away getting him out of the packaging was the scarf. I thought it was kind of going to be a little bit more fixed in place, but it kind of just sort of floats around here around the shoulders. So you can sort of see we've got a point here in the back which kind of nestles nicely around the shoulders and the back of the head, which means it kind of wants to sit here, and we can kind of see the shirt through there. But we do have a little bit of movement here, which is kind of interesting. We can see that we can move the head nicely. It does move the scarf a little bit, but anyway, I like the fact that I can move the scarf around so it's not completely locking the head in place. Sometimes when you've got a lot of plastic resting around the neck, it can really limit where we can move the head. So because the scarf can move, the head can move freely, which is good. I think you can get a lot of personality from sort of creating a little bit of sort of a different pose with, you know, just some subtle head movements, as clearly indicated by the Mandalorian in the show. We get so much sort of conveyed by just the movement of his helmet, because of course we don't see his facial expressions. I really like the sculpting here. Of course, when it comes to creatures, I think it's probably a little bit easier to make them feel more accurate to their appearance on the show compared to some human faces. So of course, the Kuiil performer is wearing a prosthetic. This isn't somebody's actual face, so we have got some really sort of exaggerated features, and I think that those translate really well into an action figure sculpt here. We've got some nice face painting here as well. We've sort of got some white facial here for the eyebrows, a little bit of sort of a fainter mustache, and sort of the beard here around the cheeks there, and it looks like it's a little bit hard to tell. I think looking up really close, I think the helmet and goggles are a separate sculpted piece. Just looking down the side here, sometimes these fit together so closely, it's hard to tell if it's an all-in-one sculpt with the face or whether it's a separate component on the top. And you can generally tell just a little bit with some of the hair sculpts because there's just like little tiny gaps. But this is so tight. It's almost making me second guess whether that is a second piece or not. It's really close together. If that is a second piece, I honestly can't tell. It's so tight on my figure. There's like just maybe this tiny little line here at the top of the goggles that's making me think that perhaps this is a second piece that's been attached on. But if that is two parts, that is a really nice and tight seam line between those two pieces, which is really nice. That's what you want to see. And it looks like the painting on everything looks pretty good. Of course, we've got goggles, which are quite featured here on the helmet. We would want them to really be painted tidily because they're being so close to the face. It draws the eyes a little bit there. We've got silver and black for those goggles. The strap goes all the way around. A little bit hard to see. Kind of got to move that scarf out of the back. We've even got a little bit of hair poking out from behind the back of the helmet there in the back. And those goggle straps go all the way around. We can even see tiny little sort of little buckle there sculpted on the strap. Really nice. We've got black details here on the sides of the helmet there as well. Really nice face sculpt, and I do like the painting there. Really cool. So moving down, of course, we've got this scarf. But I like the detail on the scarf. You can see it's kind of got like the crinkle lines that we could see on the original costume being replicated there in the surface texture of the scarf, which is really nice. It's not a two-tone color or anything like that. It is just the brown plastic that is used here. I don't think there's any weathering on there that I can tell, just the sort of the shadows being created by the folds of this plastic, which is really nice. It does hide a little bit of the sculpting underneath of the shirt. We can just sort of peek a little bit under there, but it does, of course, it's part of the costume. It has to be there. So I think it being able to move is quite nice. So let's move on. So I can see that I've got a little bit of a paint floor on the sleeve here. Kind of gives it a little bit of a grubby effect. It kind of looks like something's just brushed there, and I don't think, to be honest, that's supposed to be there. Sometimes we've got two-tone weathering and it's kind of, you know, trying to make something look weathered or dirty or sort of rusty or something like that. But I don't think that brown paint is supposed to be on the sleeve. It's not on this side there. We've got a tiny bit of it here, actually, looking up really close. So I'm suddenly doubting myself as to whether that is supposed to be there. It just kind of looks like a smudge rather than intentional. But yeah, we've got the green sleeves. We've got sort of a little bit of a mustard brown here at the top of the sleeves. At the shoulders, we've got brown gloves with a bit of a gauntlet with buckles there. Some fun details there. We can see we've got a very extended trigger finger on the right hand here. I'm hoping that's going to mean that he can hold his blaster accessory well. We can see that grip there. Very nice and extended. This one, pretty much a standard sort of C-shaped grip there. He only has one accessory to hold, so not sure that this one's really going to be holding much. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to see if he is able to sit on the Blurrg. So we'll have to have a hand to hold onto the reins. So let's see, his hands are quite small and quite sort of almost completely closed there with the fingers. That might be a little bit tricky to hold the reins, but we'll test that out anyway. Moving down, of course, we've got this sort of chocolate brown sort of tunic here with a nice brown belt, a very nice gold buckle here. There's even some detail on that gold buckle. Very nicely painted. One thing, I don't know why, but buckles always draw my eye a lot on action figures. So I really like to see when the metallic paint is nice and straight, because it always catches the light. And that looks like a nice straight paint application there on the belt buckle. We can see that we've got that belt running through on the back with two very large pouches. They don't look like they're designed to sort of hold anything. There is no holes or anything like that. They're just completely solid, enclosed. But on the back, we can see that we have a asymmetrical shaped peg hole, which is going to be for the backpack piece that we're going to be able to put on there. So I'm hoping, this looks like a pretty deep peg hole, so I'm hoping that the backpack will fit on really nicely. Sometimes if they're shallow, they pop off way too easily, and that's always slightly annoying when you're trying to get your figures into a good pose and pieces keep popping off. Moving down, we've got sort of slightly green tinted pants here, kind of brown, kind of with a bit of a green tint. A lot of sort of sculpting lines here. You can see we've got a really strong sculpting line here, sort of showing the draping of the pants and some details. Like, it looks like we've got a little bit of a pouch or a flap here going on that side. A lot going on, which of course looks a little bit askew when we really play with the articulation, because of course those strong lines start to move around. So you can sort of see where they line up, and then you can sort of twist them around a little bit. But I got to say, even just this quick little test, very nice smooth movement there on those thigh articulation points there. And we've got some very small little brown boots here, not quite to the knee, just kind of above the ankle there. We can see where that articulation point for the ankle cuts into the boot there. And no painted details on the boots here, no straps or any kind of other surface details. So not a lot of extra painted details. He doesn't have sort of, sometimes we've got little buttons and little communicators and things like that on the braces, or different sort of strap colors. It's kind of broken up into sort of block colors. We've got the main vest, we've got the sleeves, gloves, belts with a few different colors on the belt, and then only those two colors for the lower half of the body for the pants and the boots. But if that's what the costume is on screen, then that is what Hasbro is going to replicate. So overall, pretty tidy. Just those funny little marks on the arms. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be there, or I just have a little bit of a, I'm just going to say he's been in the corral working with the Blurrgs. He just got a little bit of mud on his sleeve. At least it kind of works with the color tones anyway. It's not, if it was on the face, it would really bother me. Faces, and for some reason, belt buckles. If the belt buckles are misaligned, it really throws my eye. But let's check out the articulation. Of course, I tested out his head already. We've actually got a fair tip back, and sometimes they can be really limited by how much we can sort of look up and down. And even with the scarf, I can actually get quite a decent amount. Kind of have to move the scarf a little bit, but that's actually more of a up and down than I was really expecting. And of course, very nice side to side. Let's test out the arms. Okay, so nice and straight. That was pretty easy. That wasn't really too much of a fight. Of course, nice articulation there. Even though he's been in his backing card packaging for a while, he's actually fairly smooth to move, which I gotta say, that elbow was a little bit easier. This one, a little bit tighter, but I still got there fairly easily. Of course, we can rotate the hands around as usual. This one has got a side-to-side movement. Oh, that's a lot of side-to-side movement, actually. I wasn't expecting to get too much movement because his hands are a little bit smaller, but yeah, that's some interesting side-to-side movement. And this one here is also side-to-side. Again, some pretty good movement there. Can tip that all the way to the side. Nice movement on this one. You can see just how much rotation I'm able to get there. Really fun. Okay, so most sort of human height figures, if I move the scarf to the side, have a bit of a mid-torso articulation point, which lets them sort of swing forwards and back, sort of like they're leaning forward. So he's just got the waist articulation because he's a bit too short to have 2 points there. So it's not really giving me front and back. I'm just doing like a tiny wiggle there. It feels more like I'm just sort of wrenching on the joint there. And oh, a little bit of a fight to turn. Oh, and there was a bit of a click there. It's a little bit of a grippy one. It's not a smooth movement side to side, but I can get there. And yeah, I'm not particularly the biggest fan of when it feels like I might break something when I'm moving a toy through a point that it's supposed to move. But yes, I can get that there. I just don't like that sort of clicking. Makes me a little bit anxious. But yeah, it's not a smooth movement, but I can still get that movement there. Now the legs, we have got, looking at the tunic, we've actually got a split down the side, which we often have on Hasbro toys just so that we can move the legs. But we've also got this little cut in here, which kind of follows the line of the tunic, which of course flows open. So we've just got this one rubbery piece here, which means that we should be able to get the thigh quite high. We can see those splits there coming into play so that we can get the right leg all the way up. It's quite short of a tunic in the back, so it's not really going to impact, but it's just the shape of the thighs there, the pants that are stopping going all the way back there. So this, if I can get that arm out of the way, we've got one side split here on the other side, but we don't have a split here in the front. So we've just got this whole piece here in the front. So we're probably, oh yeah, we can still get a reasonable height there. We're just going to be flexing that plastic over to the side a little bit. So the short tunic, it doesn't actually get in the way too much of the legs like I thought, which is really nice. And we can see if we're going to get him sitting on a blurrg, we need to be able to move the legs out to the side. Again, those splits are coming in handy so that we can get a little bit more of a wider stance there with the legs. And of course, I showed before, these are so easy to swivel. And then let's test out the knees. Oh, we're finding our first sticking point here. It's possibly because the lower half of the legs are so short. I don't have as much to sort of grip onto. There we go. Okay, let's go with both. Bit stiff on both, but I can bend them to about that point before the sculpting of the pants is going to hit across the back of the knee there. But that's about as tight as I would hope to get in terms of knee articulation, and we'll do a little bit of a wiggle there with the boots as expected. Nice. Good. Okay, so about what I was expecting. A little bit tight there on the knees, but sometimes they need just a little bit of a wiggle around when you get them out of the packaging. But I've actually got a little bit more movement in the legs than I was expecting, which bodes well for getting him on a Blurrg, which I'm still crossing my fingers. I'm not sure how that one's going to work out. So let's get him assembled with the accessories. So I'm going to start out with the backpack here. So it's a plain brown backpack. We've got a really nice sort of fake leather texture to the surface there. We can see we've got the top flap and a little bit of a strap coming down, and we've got a couple of silver tools. So the little accessories here painted in silver, just strapped to the side there. Really nice. I like the sort of the worn nature there. And we can see that it is hollow, and we have a asymmetrical shaped peg there. It's kind of rectangular with a bit of a corner cut off, so it is quite light. And of course we've got that peg shape there in the back. So I'm hoping this is going to sit on nicely. Okay, it goes on fairly well, and that does feel like it's got a good grip, to be honest. It's just resting on this pouch here, but I don't feel like that's stopping it from getting all the way up close. I can't see daylight in between the body of the figure and the backpack, which is a good sign. If it sticks out a little bit and you can see daylight all the way through, that sort of makes me worried that it's going to be one of those ones that you knock off. And it does fit quite nicely in behind that scarf there at the top. So everything works together really nicely there. So now I can put his hands down, and we can kind of feel like we've got him more fully assembled there. Looks really good. I'm just kind of curious to see how well he's going to stand, because I've been playing with the articulation. Okay, that's actually a fairly good balance. I thought maybe with his stature and adding a lot of plastic to the back, it might make him a little bit unsteady, but he stands up pretty well there. That's a pretty cool figure of Kuiil. I'm liking that. Okay, so now we've just got the one accessory to go. This small little sort of a blaster rifle, I guess we've got here. It's an interesting color. It's not a silver metallic finish. It's almost got a hint of sort of like a bronzy, almost a subtle green tint to the metallic paint here for the main body of the blaster, just along there. Then we've got a brown sort of leather strap here, coming down from the barrel to the end. And then we've got the end sort of stock part here in brown. Again, the same on the same side. So we don't have the same sort of grip that I'm used to putting in action figure hands like standard sort of blaster pistols. We've just got this little sort of triangular sort of notch coming down here, and we have an enclosed trigger guard. And of course, we saw on the Kuiil figure that very pointed trigger finger. So I'm hoping that this won't be too hard to get into his hands, because it is a little bit of unusual shape. We don't really have a grip to hold there, so this might be a bit tricky. Sometimes it does take a little bit of, I use the word wrestling, trying to get these things into action figure hands, because yeah, with the lack of a grip here, it's going to be a bit interesting to see if I can get this. I'm not sure if I want to get the strap into the hands or if I'm just going to get the finger. So I'm going to try with the finger first. The finger fits into that, and the hand is moving actually a lot. I can fit the finger through that trigger guard very easily, but I'm a little bit unsure as to how to get the rest of it. I don't know if I'm going to put that. It just kind of fits like that. It's a little bit tricky. It's kind of pulling the finger away from the trigger guard there a little bit. For me, honestly, it might be more of a sling it over his shoulder type deal. I know that they have to work with the accessories as pictured on screen, which don't always translate into action figures. And I'm probably going to put it slung over the shoulder for me personally, because that's very tricky. If I do manage to, after spending a bit of time, get into a better position of holding the blaster, I'll put a few photos up on screen, because sometimes it's one of those ones where you just need to spend a lot longer really sort of working and finessing the poses, especially with slightly unusual accessories like this one that doesn't have a conventional sort of grip for the action figure to hold. But it does look pretty cool there on the shoulder. He's got very short shoulders, so it's one of those ones where having a little bit of a raised arm might help sort of keep that in place. But to be honest, I don't really think of Kuiil as, you know, wielding a blaster. I think of him with the Blurrgs. So I think now that I've gone over the articulation, the paint job, and the accessories of this Kuiil figure, I'm really, really excited to see him next to a Blurrg and potentially on a Blurrg as well. So I'm going to go grab my brand new Blurrg figure. So this is really exciting. Something I've been wanting in my 3.75-inch collection for quite a while is Kuiil on Blurrg, and I finally have it. So it did take a little bit of time to get Kuiil posed on the saddle here. Thankfully, he's got a lot of articulation points in the legs, but surprisingly, the trickiest part was actually getting him to hold onto the reins. They are a little bit more sculpted to fit with the Mandalorian's hands and just the positioning. I had to take the reins off, get them into Kuiil's hands, and then kind of get the whole thing onto the Blurrg as you see it here. Now I have the same sort of issue with Kuiil as I do with the Mandalorian. You can see a lot of air there in between sort of his seat and the saddle here, because he's got these pouches on his thighs, so you can't split his legs quite as wide as you might want to. But I think overall it's a pretty good position really, and it looks the part when I have them all together like this, and it balances well just like the Mandalorian did. I can get the Blurrg with the tail off the ground and everything like that. It looks really cool, and I think it's kind of interesting that Hasbro didn't release basically two versions of the Blurrg, one with a Mandalorian figure and one with a Kuiil, because the Kuiil figure is a little bit older. If you don't have this one in your collection, you might be hunting one down to put it with a Blurrg. Now I know that when Hot Toys released their 12-inch scale Blurrg, they released one just by itself, so you could buy just the Blurrg if that's what you wanted, one that included a Mandalorian figure and one that included a Kuiil figure, so you could kind of build them up as whichever you wanted to. I think it's interesting that Hasbro didn't go that route either and release basically the Blurrg with a Kuiil, because I know that a lot of collectors would probably just have bought both of them, the Mando on Blurrg and Kuiil on Blurrg, and then maybe in a couple of extras just to, so in case you like to keep your figures carded. Of course, the one that came with the Blurrg is the Arvala 7 variant of the Mandalorian with a fabric cape, so I can see some collectors might be conflicted there and want to buy two of them, one to keep that figure on its backing card and one to open because it looks so fantastic when it's actually on the Blurrg. But I'm really happy that I finally have a Kuiil on Blurrg here. I think it looks pretty cool, even though it's of course not really intended for this Kuiil figure to fit on the Blurrg. It was released some time ago, probably long before Hasbro ever thought that they were going to be doing this Blurrg mount, but I'm really happy at how well I'm able to get him seated there. Not completely perfect, but I'm really excited. I'm definitely going to have to track down a second Blurrg. At this point, we have no stockists of the Blurrg figure here in New Zealand. I had to import this one from Australia, and I didn't want to rush out and buy multiples in case we got them locally, because that's going to be cheaper in the long run. I don't have to pay for postage. But at this point, now that I have this one and I've seen both the Mandalorian and the Kuiil on it, my Kuiil figure, I think I'm definitely going to need multiples of it, and I'm not sure that I can wait any longer. I might be tracking another one down from an international stockist, because this just looks fantastic. I was blown away with this Blurrg figure. I love the detail, I love the paint job, the articulation, the weathering, everything about it. It stands beautifully. I can get about as much posing as you can for a big mouth with legs. You know, there's not as much going on. It's a little bit of a T-Rex shape, kind of T-Rex and frog kind of mixed together there with the funny little arms, and it's all mouth, and we've kind of got this tadpole tail out the back. Fantastic. I'm having so much fun with this Blurrg. I really do need more of them. So now that I've confirmed that my Kuiil figure looks really cool riding the Blurrg with the saddle and reins and everything like that, now I want to check out and see what the Blurrg's going to look like with Kuiil standing alongside, because of course Kuiil does own many Blurrgs as we see in the show. So I'm just going to quickly get Kuiil standing up. Oh, those tight knees. So there we go. We've kind of got him back into a standing position. So now to take off the sort of accessories off the Blurrg. So the reins are very easy. They're simply just sort of biting onto them. But the saddle is kind of an interesting one. So of course on the box for the Blurrg, it was indicated that it is a separate piece, and you can see that yes, it isn't sculpted as part of the Blurrg, which is fantastic if you want to army build this creature. So on the underside, we have sort of this little pig shape here. If I'm just going to pop that out, you can see that we do have that pig that slips in through the ring. And moving those out of the way, we can see that there is a pig hole here on the underside. So matching all of those pieces up, this pig actually fits through this ring and into this little hole on the underside of the Blurrg. So that means that the saddle's always going to be in the correct position. It won't slip around, and it'll always be nice and easy to find it sort of centered, because you can see there is a lot of sculpting going on with the underside of the saddle. If I just pop the Blurrg down for a moment, you can see the different pieces going on there with the different plastics. So we really want to make sure that that's bedded down on the Blurrg in the right position. It's got a little bit of flex in it with these sections here, but I like that we've got that sort of anchor point on the underside of the Blurrg. It does mean that we have a little bit of a hole visible there on the underside, but to be honest, it's kind of like having the holes here, or sometimes we have sort of rivets and screws on the underside of our Star Wars toys. It disappears once we have the Blurrg standing like this. So once I get these saddly parts out of the way, then we can see we've now got, if I straighten his legs up, because it took a lot of articulation, tweaking it to get him into a standing position after riding that Blurrg. So get him into a little bit of a standing position here. We can see that we have Kuiil with a Blurrg. And of course, now that it looks pretty cool, I like the fact that I have to say I'm quite happy that Hasbro did it as a separate saddle. I know that if it was sculpted as a one and done piece with the Blurrg, it would be low profile, and we might get figures to sit on it a little bit better, because of course having a separate piece is going to bulk it out a little bit more. But if it was sculpted on, I'm not really going to army build it for the background, because of course, you know, we've got like a few Blurrg. If you've got a whole lot of them with saddles on, it can look a little awkward. If you've got like 3 or 4 of them just like this, I think that would look really cool. And then of course we could have a little scene with Kuiil and his Blurrg herd. Definitely needs some tweaking now that I've played with his legs a lot like that, because of course the Blurrg do show up in some other content from Star Wars, originating back to that 1980s era Ewok film. Of course they do look pretty fun, and I love the Star Wars creatures in general. I'm definitely kind of hoping to build up a little bit of a herd of these guys. You know, I'm going to have a couple with saddles on for the Mandalorian and Kuiil, and then a lot in the background because they're just so fun. And it's been so long since Hasbro has done some really cool creatures in the vintage collection line. But yeah, that was just a little bit of a bonus. Of course, this video is about the Kuiil figure. It's just, I was so excited to see him on the Blurrg because those moments in the show were some of my favorites from the first season, you know. So this is a fantastic Kuiil figure, and I'm really excited to see that I can actually mount him on the Blurrg, which was one of the main goals that, you know, when I got this figure, I didn't know that that was going to be an eventuality, but now that I can do that, I love this figure. Very cool. Of course, it's always going to be rather poignant that we're not really going to ever see too much of the story of Kuiil after, of course, his ending in the season 1 of The Mandalorian. I thought he was a fantastic character, and just fantastic performances from the voice actor and the on-set performer as well. Really brings an interesting character to life. And of course, when characters meet their fate on screen, we generally don't get a lot of merchandise for them going forward. So I'm not really sure that we're going to get that much more Kuiil merchandise moving forward. I'm hoping that Hasbro will release this one perhaps for collectors that don't have this figure to go with the newly released Blurrg, because it's really cool. Even if they don't make a single change to this figure, I've been able to test that it does look pretty cool on the Blurrg. So perhaps if you don't have this one, you can track it down on the secondary market. Very, very cool. It does take a little bit of tweaking with the legs to get them to sit there. And of course, I've gone and made him a little bit unsteady. There we go. Now he's standing up. Very cool. So this was a lot of fun. Of course, it was mostly about the Kuiil figure, but I really, really wanted to test it on the Blurrg, and that was really exciting. So I'm really happy. Slowly but surely, I'm building out my Mandalorian series of vintage collection figures. I collected up as many as I could get my hands on here in New Zealand, and I'm slowly making my way through, finally opening them all up now that I've cleared a bit of space in my action figure display. It's always about the space for collectors, isn't it? We're always running out of space, especially when it comes to action figures. The stream of figures never stops, so it's always about finding space. But Kuiil is so cool, I had to get him out of the packaging so I could put him alongside a Blurrg for my display. This was so much fun. I love having a new Star Wars creature for my display. It's been so long, and I'm really excited that Kuiil looks fantastic with it. Now I just need a few more Blurrgs so that I can have Kuiil with his herd of Blurrgs. Really, really cool. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars vintage collection figure. Had a lot of fun checking out all of the details and having a little bit of fun with a Blurrg as well. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a vintage collection fan, I recently unboxed the Blurrg and the Mandalorian figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.